9 symptoms of a bad ignition coil and how to tell for sure. Your car starts. It drives, but something doesn't feel right. The engine isn't smooth anymore. Acceleration feels inconsistent, and sometimes it feels like the engine is skipping. Just for a moment, then catching again. That small skip feeling is often the first sign of an ignition problem, because inside your engine, everything depends on timing, fuel, air, and spark. And the ignition coil is responsible for creating that spark. It takes low battery voltage and turns it into high voltage to ignite the air-fuel mixture. But when the coil starts to fail, that spark becomes weak, or inconsistent, or disappears completely. And when that happens, the engine cannot run smoothly anymore. In this video, I'll show you 9 common symptoms of a bad ignition coil. We'll start with the early signs, then move into the more serious ones. And I'll also show you how to tell for sure if the ignition coil is actually the problem and not something else. Let's go step by step. Symptom number 1, engine misfire. This is the most common and most noticeable symptom. When an ignition coil fails, one cylinder may not fire properly. That creates a misfire. Sometimes it feels like a quick jerk, sometimes a repeated shaking, sometimes just a small hesitation. At low speed, it may feel mild, but under acceleration, it becomes much more obvious because the engine is under load and a weak spark cannot keep up. Misfire is usually the first clear sign that ignition is not working correctly. Symptom number 2, rough idle. At idle, the engine depends on perfect balance. Each cylinder must fire smoothly, but if one coil is weak, that balance is lost. The engine may shake. RPM may move slightly up and down. The car may feel unstable while standing still. You may feel it in the steering wheel or through the seat. Sometimes it gets worse when the engine warms up. Sometimes it improves slightly when you start driving, but that uneven idle is a strong warning sign. Symptom number 3, loss of power when accelerating. This is where many people notice it. You press the gas, but the car doesn't respond properly. There is a delay, or a weak pull, or a sudden drop in power. This happens because under acceleration, the engine needs a stronger spark. And if the ignition coil cannot provide it, combustion becomes weak, or incomplete. Sometimes the car feels sluggish. Other times it feels like power comes and goes. That uneven acceleration is a classic ignition coil symptom. Symptom number 4, poor fuel economy. If the spark is weak, fuel does not burn properly. And when fuel doesn't burn completely, it gets wasted. That leads to lower fuel efficiency. You may notice you are filling up more often, even though your driving habits haven't changed. At first, the change may be small, but over time it becomes noticeable. This is one of the silent symptoms, because nothing feels dramatic, but the cost adds up quickly. Symptom number 5, check engine light. Modern vehicles monitor misfires very closely. If the system detects irregular combustion, it will trigger the check engine light. Sometimes you get a general warning. Sometimes you get a specific code pointing to a cylinder. But remember this, the check engine light does not confirm the coil is bad. It only tells you something is wrong. That is why proper diagnosis matters. Symptom number 6, hard starting. A weak ignition coil can make starting difficult. The engine may crank longer or struggle before starting. Sometimes it starts but runs rough for a few seconds. This happens because starting requires a strong, clean spark. And if that spark is weak, the mixture doesn't ignite easily. This symptom often appears together with others, like misfire or rough idle. Symptom number 7, backfire or popping sound. When combustion is incomplete, unburned fuel can enter the exhaust, and when that fuel ignites later, it creates a popping or backfiring sound. You may hear it during acceleration or when lifting off the throttle. This is not just noise, it's a sign that fuel is not burning where it should, and that often leads back to ignition problems. Symptom number 8, strong fuel smell. If fuel is not burning properly, some of it leaves the engine unburned. That can create a noticeable fuel smell, especially around the exhaust or after the engine has been running. This is another sign of incomplete combustion, and incomplete combustion is often linked to weak spark. Symptom number 9, engine stalling. This is a more serious stage. If the ignition coil fails completely, the engine may lose spark in one or more cylinders, and if the failure is strong enough, the engine may stall. sometimes at idle, sometimes while driving. This turns the problem from a performance issue into a reliability issue, because now you can't trust the car to keep running. Now here is something important. Ignition coil symptoms can look very similar to other problems: worn spark plugs, fuel injector issues, sensor faults, even vacuum leaks. That is why guessing can cost you money. So how do you tell for sure? Start with the pattern. Does the problem get worse under acceleration? Does it feel like a misfire? Do you have a code for a specific cylinder? Here is a simple test. Swap the ignition coil from one cylinder to another, then check if the problem moves. If it does, the coil is the likely cause. You should also check the spark plugs, because a bad spark plug can make a good coil look faulty. And if possible, use a scan tool to monitor misfire data, because testing is always better than guessing. So let's quickly recap. A bad ignition coil may cause engine misfire, rough idle, loss of power, poor fuel economy, check engine light, hard starting, backfire, fuel smell, and engine stalling. Some of these signs start small, some get worse over time, and some appear suddenly when the coil fails completely. That is why early action matters, because the longer you drive with weak ignition, the worse the problem can get. And now I want to hear from you. What was the first symptom you noticed? Misfire, rough idle, loss of power, or check engine light? Comment below with your experience. And if enough people mention the same issue, I'll make the next video on that exact problem.